Hi, friends, and welcome to another episode of your Bish Therapist podcast. Today's episode is going to be about Real Housewives of Orange County Reunion Part 1 because holy guacamole. I had so many notes, I couldn't even post them on Instagram, which is extremely rare. Usually for an episode, I'll be able to pull like a couple of concepts or things like that. And I just had so much to say after reunion. Today, I'm going to literally just talk all about that because that probably will take me a full hour. However, I do want to just do some housekeeping here at the top of the hour. Number one, last week there was no bite-sized bish because I did 2 full episodes on neurodiversity, and I had my friend Kathy on who shared her experience, strength, and hope being a mother to a non-speaking autistic son. But number 2, I guess unless you've been living under a rock, we know what's been going on with this election cycle. And this week it's just been exhausting. And I just, didn't have it in me to do a bite-sized bish. I know a lot of people kind of look to me for feedback and things like that, and which I'm honored by. I totally appreciate. Sometimes I just need to, collect my thoughts and take some time. But listen, I know that people aren't here for politics. As an ally, I do feel it's important to talk about themes of patriarchal society, racism and sexism, misogyny, and all these other things. That stuff is all political. But otherwise, we are going to keep this podcast free of politics because I think we're all exhausted. My goal is to just keep things sane on my side of the street, keep things normal, keep being a voice against the patriarchy, being a voice and a proud ally. So that is what I shall continue to do. A couple updates that I knew that you would probably want. One is that I did have to have a follow-up after a mammogram due to some concern, and I'm happy to report there's no evidence of cancer. Yay! Very excited about that. And, let's keep it at 2. Two's good. I'm set with 2. That was kind of stressful. And, again, it's been a terrible few weeks to have a lifelong anxiety disorder. It really has. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about is that I have not been feeling great due to a plethora of things. It's dark and it's cold and, stress and the world's on fire, blah, 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 stuff like that. So it's not just one thing, but I can tell that my body's really tired and needs a break. So what this means is I am going to be wrapping up season 3 of this podcast probably by the end of this month. I would say maybe 4 to 6 weeks to just, focus on me. And here's the thing. When I do go on my breaks, I want to reiterate that I do offer a subscription for $5 a month through Spreaker Supporters Club, where when I'm off, whether it's going to be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, I don't know, maybe 8 weeks. It really just depends how I feel. I have to let my body lead me. But on those times where I take a break from the traditional free podcast, because all my content is free. I mean, like 1% of it is behind a paywall. But these are times where, I have to, follow my own boundaries and listen to my body. And so I will still be doing episodes for people who are part of Spreaker Supporters Club. And I don't know how many, I don't know what that's going to look like, but I will be doing at least one weekly, like bite-sized bish type episode, and once a month, a big, like regular episode. Because the thing is, Real Housewives of Beverly Hills is going to be coming back. Southern Charm is going to be coming back, and I love both and will cover both. So if I happen to be on my break while that stuff is out, then I will record episodes for Spreaker and re-release them for free once I'm back. That's, to me, the most fair solution that I can think of, because I understand if people do not want another subscription, there's tons of ways to support me. So if Spreaker Supporters Club isn't for you, that's more than okay. But if you want to hear me while I'm gone, that's the way to do it. Now, where to find Spreaker Supporters Club and how to become a supporter. When I post my podcast, wherever you listen to the podcast, I list a link to Spreaker Supporters Club. So you can go to my Instagram and you can go to my link tree and find the link there. That's one option. 2, you can go to Spreaker and you can look up Your Bish Therapist podcast and become a supporter that way. Or 3, in my opinion, the easiest is wherever you listen to these podcasts, look at the episode description underneath. It's all the junk that most people don't look at, which fair enough. But there's links to things in there like my link tree, like the Spreaker Supporters Club that'll take you right to the page and you could just sign up from there. It's actually a very easy process. Now, the only key is with Spreaker Supporters Club, you have to listen on Spreaker, it's just an app. It's free. It's non-complicated. They don't spam you with a million things. If you have any questions about that, feel free to email me or DM me. Either way, I appreciate every single one of you for all your support. It means so much to me. And, thank you, thank you, thank you. The last thing that I want to say before I get into OC is that this week I went on a podcast. I guest on a lot of podcasts because for me, I don't care about how big or not a podcast is, what their reach is. I don't care. I love supporting my fellow content creators. I love being a guest on other podcasts. And I love even reaching one person. Great. Some of you listening to me right now probably heard me from, Bravo and Cocktails or Ryan Bailey or Amy Phillips or somewhere. And so, I love that whole process of, these relationships that I form and being able to guest and all these things. But anyway, so I guested on a podcast and I was told that the sister of the person, they both listen to this podcast, and which I'm always honored by because, there's a lot of stuff to take in. And, I'm always honored when people choose this, that because of sharing my experience, strength, and hope, because of some of the information that I've shared about narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, and things like that, that this person has decided to extricate herself from a unhealthy relationship. And I'm being very mindful of my words because it's not my story to tell. I also don't want to be too specific, but the point of why I'm sharing this is that I could probably die happy right now. And don't worry, by the way, I'm not going anywhere. I plan to live with medication for a very long time. But I just feel so honored. And I feel like, people think I do this for a lot of reasons, clout or whatever. And the real reason that I do this is to give my pain purpose, right? So that's purposeful for me. And B, to truly help other people. And so to really know that I have truly helped somebody just by saying the things that I've said, to look at a relationship, to evaluate it and to say, what, this is unhealthy. And I'm stammering a little bit because I'm so grateful. And I just think that's probably, in my lifetime, those are the achievements that for me mean the absolute most. And so when I talk about on this podcast, when I talk about certain things and sometimes people get mad at me, there's a reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. And it's not to create drama. It's actually the exact opposite. So I just want to thank people for hearing me, for being a part of this community, which is extremely valuable to me. Who we surround ourselves with is really important. And I'm surrounded by you all. And I just couldn't be happier and be more grateful. Your vibe attracts your tribe. And I am grateful you all are my tribe. Let me get into Real Housewives of Orange County because holy moly, there is a lot. So reunion part 1, and by the way, there will be 3 parts to this reunion, which now I see why, because if this is all we got a lot in part 1 of a reunion. I feel like as of late, some of the reunions have been quite lame, where part one is literally like, who cares? But OC just really, really brought it. And for some reasons that were really crappy, in my opinion. And I feel kind of disappointed in some ways. And so, let's just get into it. I do want to start with the biggest of the issues, in my opinion, which was the Heather, Emily, and Tamra takedown of Katie, because I have so many thoughts on this. And I posted something on social media that got a lot of survivors really cheering. I will say I'm beyond disappointed. As I told you all before, I usually don't stan anyone. And the reason for that is because all these people are humans and humans are infallible and we all have good and bad qualities. And if you stan people, they will let you down. And I think I might have even said I stan Emily, and here I stand being forced to face my own feedback, which sometimes it really does just slap you right in the face. And it's like, well, okay, Melissa, should have listened to yourself. So I really feel extremely disappointed at Emily, and I will explain why. I think that Emily had some sort of alliance with Heather, and I say alliance because I think that the way Emily talked and behaved was contradictory to her normal. She has pretty interesting takes that are, to me, based in reality, and she kind of tends to be a voice of reason. But in this case, she really kind of seemed like a mean girl. And I felt she did it on behalf of Heather, which I also don't like, because I thought Emily had more integrity than that. But at the end of the day, we have to remember, again, these people are people. They're fallible, they're human. And the one thing that I do want to point out is that Emily and Heather and Tamra, they have like real lives to live. And so if like Emily has to go on and live her life, and if her circle includes Heather Dubrow, then she probably cares more about that than about upsetting a bunch of people by what she said online. And so in part of that is fair, right? Like, this is her life. She can't live it because I'm disappointed or anyone is disappointed. But I do hope that there's a piece of this that I'm going to talk about that she needs to really understand and take ownership of. Specifically, they were all trying to paint a picture that basically Katie is a pathological liar who lost custody of her children and wrongly accused of a man, resulting in a false arrest. And then in like a weird Housewives crossover twist, then there was also beef with Sutton, who again has this whatever alliance with Heather. And she claims that Katie used her by failing to follow through on a promise to bring high profile golfers to an event at Sutton's home. And Sutton said she didn't pay for anything and blah, blah, blah. Okay. So as Katie just like faces this firing squad, by the way, with grace and dignity, then Heather says, by the way, falsely accusing people is kind of your thing. Okay. Oof. This was intended to mortally wound. And what annoys me is who we allow ourselves to be when we're angry says a lot about our character. And I say this as someone who, here's a funny thing. I did an Ask Me Anything on Instagram, and someone asked me what my sign was. And I said, I'm an Aries. And even though I do seem very kind, I am an Aries in every sense of the word. I am fiery. I am stubborn. I am a ram. That I am the epitome of a ram. That is my spirit animal. That is my sign. And honestly, it's helped me survive because I'm tough and I put my head down and I plow through things. But my point is that although I'm very kind, I do have a temper. I was raised with a lot of anger, with a lot of screaming. So I can be quick to anger. What you do with that is extremely telling of your character. Saying things we don't mean, or, being unkind, right? Those sorts of things happen. They're not great, but they happen, and you have to like take accountability and all of that. But in my opinion, this Heather, what she was trying to do is just like crush Katie to dust. And it just felt so gross and disgusting. And from what I've seen online, a lot of fans feel that way. I think that Heather can be an amazing parent, but for me, that's pretty much the end of it. There's a tale of two stories. And what we know to be true is that, I say this all the time, is our perspective is our reality. So there's going to be one side of the story, another side of the story. Somewhere in the middle is the truth, right? And Katie does seem to be having some trouble with fabrications and keeping stories straight, right? There is some behavioral stuff there that it's like, this does seem to be happening a lot. However, Katie tells the story 10 years ago while living in Georgia, was driving her children home when a man swerved into her lane, screaming expletives at her in what she called a road rage incident. She called the police and she was filming him. Police arrived, and when they arrived, he wasn't able to be calmed. And so they tased him and arrested him and took him to jail. Okay. So Katie tells her side of the story with that. And then Heather comes in, refuting this claim by claiming that police never lie, which, if the past couple of years have taught us anything, is just like insanely laughable. Listen, I have friends who are state troopers, and they're amazing people. There are good and bad actors in all situations. Therapists, police officers, nurses, doctors, lawyers, all of it. There are good and bad actors. But to try to claim that police would never lie is outlandish, number one. And number two, Heather claims that even though she doesn't like digging stuff up on people, she's dug up all of what she feels like is dirt about the fact that the man who was in this road rage incident saw Katie texting while driving with her kids in the back seat, which enraged him due to him experiencing a personal loss as a result of distracted driving. Heather claims, she's telling this man's story that I'm sure she hasn't talked to, doesn't know, but she's just, again, police don't lie or what have you. So Katie allegedly follows him, pulls behind him in his driveway, and he was filming Katie due to his concerns about his safety. Okay. So here's the thing that Heather is doing in this situation is when she's talking about this poor man's plight, which, by the way, may be accurate, right? If somebody lost someone due to a texting and driving incident and they see someone texting and driving, their behavior may become irrational and out of control from a place of grief, right? That is totally possible, 1,000%. But the problem is that because of how these ladies acted towards Katie, they made her look like a saint, and she didn't have to address any of these inconsistencies because they clearly had a meeting before this reunion and were like, we're going to crush her to dust. Let's compile, evidence A, B, C, and D, and let's just do that. And so what I appreciated is that Andy calls Heather out for being hypocritical because they flash back to her saying this, is she hates to be in an environment where people dig things up whilst she is literally in the process of digging up stories with the goal of denigrating and humiliating Katie. Now, the real part for me that I alluded to when I started this was Emily then asked Katie about losing physical and legal custody of her children during her first divorce. Okay. And here's what bothered me from the millisecond she asked the question. Emily is not a dummy. She, will tell you she's a lawyer, she's educated. So she asked this question from a place of seemingly curiosity or confusion. But make no mistake, Emily wasn't confused. She knows exactly what leads women to lose physical and legal custody of children. As a lawyer who has worked with the Innocence Project, I would assume that she's come into contact with police who lie and with women who have been abused and lost custody of their kids because the legal system is a blood-soaked nightmare. So I would expect someone who's a lawyer with all of that education and experience in the justice system understand the nuances behind asking that question. And in my opinion, she asked the question because Heather either asked her to, encouraged her to, so that Heather didn't have to look like the bully. I think that Emily sold herself out to line with Heather, and it just made her look awful. And people like me are incredibly disappointed. So Katie explains the reason that she lost custody of her kids. Katie explains she was living in a facility in Atlanta and she couldn't say the name of it. And her parents lived locally, but refused to help her because they didn't agree with her divorcing a man she felt the need to flee from. And because the family court system can be a blood-soaked nightmare, her ex was immediately given custody of the kids because Katie couldn't provide an address. So let me explain what that is likely about. For people who aren't familiar or couldn't read between the lines, is that likely she was at some sort of a women's shelter, potentially a domestic violence shelter in particular, because at women's shelters, they have to be obscure. There's no notation that they're there. There's no advertising. And when you are living in a women's shelter, you are not allowed to give the address for safety reasons. Okay. And so what I saw was someone who claims to have been in the legal system, understanding when Katie says she was living in a facility that she couldn't say the name of. Emily should have immediately known at that point what Katie was talking about. Now, I have not talked to Katie. I have not confirmed nor heard this denied. But as a therapist who has had the honor and pleasure of working with survivors and thrivers, I have a lot of knowledge about this, and you would think that Emily would too. So what I think happened is that Katie had the courage to leave an unhealthy relationship, lose her kids in the process, work to rebuild and regain custody of her children over an 18-month period, claw her way back through mud and broken glass to retake the reins of her life. And I think she's deserving more respect than she's getting. Period. The problem is that Katie does have some inconsistent stories, right? She does. But the problem here is when Emily and Heather did this, it just made them look awful. And it didn't give Katie any opportunity to really have to talk through some of those inconsistencies that they brought up beforehand. I think that all of this is done in the name of Heather being accused of having a paparazzi come to Disneyland. That is what this is about. Okay. I need people to understand that Heather is so angry about being accused of calling paparazzi. This is over paparazzi gate, that she is willing to bring out every single thing from Katie's past to try to humiliate her over paparazzi. That is outlandish. That is the most bizarre hill to die on. And in my opinion, the stupidest hill to die on. Heather keeps showing herself. And it's going to be really interesting to see how this specifically plays out in part 2 and 3, or if we're not going to hear any more about it because, they're probably going to move on to, the other drama, which there's no lack of. And then Alexis is going to be coming on and, she'll be a huge distraction so that, Heather and Emily don't have to really account for this behavior. But I just wanted to dedicate the first half of this podcast to helping people understand what it is that we're likely talking about here and how atrociously abhorrent it is what Heather and Emily did. Okay. Going to end that there. Now, we're going to talk about Jen and Ryan because, boy, do I have a lot to say about that too. So to prove my earlier point that when Emily asks a question from a place of curiosity or help me understand, she knows exactly what she's doing because Emily says to Jen, "You're very reserved with me and I don't know why." And it's like, Emily, because you made fun of her all season for being broke. You made fun of her all season for, listen, Jen does have her head in the sand. She does have some behaviors she needs to change, but you've been so rude to her, so awful to her all season. And then you give, Emily did give a very researched and articulate read on Ryan and did really talk about and laid out specifically what's really happening here. So I'll share with you what that is. But again, this is more evidence to support exactly what I just said about Emily, is that she knows exactly what she's doing. So Jen was continuing to have her head in the sand, claiming Ryan didn't do anything wrong. And just every woman was just like eye rolling. And it's like, love is love is blind. I think that's a show. People just get blinded by the prospect and the feeling of love. Like it can be so intoxicating that people are willing to let a lot of stuff go and forgive anything. But Emily points out that Ryan did do something wrong and that he provided information about said wrongdoing with his best friend, Matt, in exchange for immunity. Emily did break this down. Wow. It was intense. A man, last name Missoura, I hope I'm saying that right. Missoura was an interpreter for baseball star Shohei Ohtani. And I hope I'm saying all that right. The interpreter was also a gambling addict who made bets with Ryan's best friend, Matt, the person who is currently charged and going to do some jail time for his role in this. Okay. Matt also is an illegal bookie. Gambling is different in all states. I actually used to be a gambling prevention specialist. That was like one of my first jobs. I was trained in it. I learned a lot about gambling addiction. And so what I can tell you is that laws and rules and regulations can be different, and there's in different states, and there are always loopholes, but it doesn't make sometimes what's happening any less illegal according to federal law. The interpreter racks up a massive gambling debt, stole more than $16 million from Ohtani's bank account, and transferred the money into a bank account that had Ryan's name on it. Okay, that's fact. That is fact. Ryan then moved the money into marker accounts in casinos and cashed the money in for chips, resulting in 32 trips to Vegas last year alone, which if you average that out, that comes to roughly 2.5 times per month. That means you're spending like half of your time in Vegas. Money laundering is defined as the process of illegally concealing the origin of money obtained from illicit activities such as gambling and converting the funds into a seemingly legitimate source. So what happened is that Ryan gave information on his best friend, Matt, who introduced Ryan as his money launderer at a party. He gave information in exchange for immunity. Those are facts. Those are facts. And so what I don't like, you all know that I do not like when we get into semantics where it's like he did nothing wrong. Well, okay, so he wasn't charged with anything, but clearly Ryan was involved in shady dealings, and his friend is going to do jail time as a result. So Gina comes in and tries to be a good friend to Jen and point out that Ryan is culpable in some way, ethically and possibly beyond, okay? Some way, shape, or form. Let's not use the semantic game to try to get Ryan to not have to take accountability. Jen is in denial, and I think, in my opinion, Jen is having some cognitive dissonance where it seems like she's a wonderful human, kind of a spiritual gangster, and yet attaching herself to a shady character. Gina says, Ryan was aware his friend had an illegal gambling business, and I get nervous. I don't want you in those private planes and those hotel rooms. So Gina is right. If you hang around garbage, you start to stink. And enjoying the stolen fruits of someone else's labor is a bad look at best and criminal at worst. Okay? And here's the other question. Her giant ring that she has on her finger, where did Ryan get the money for that? Was that stolen money? Because it could have been. It could not have been. I have no idea. I'm just asking questions in terms of Jen has some serious decisions to make where I believe that Jen has gotten her into a very similar situation that she did with her first husband. And she has this cognitive dissonance that's forcing her to ignore all these red flags, meaning she's homeless. Her ex is not paying any sort of support. She's talked about that on Watch What Happens Live. Her ex, Will, was ordered to pay the support. He's having financial troubles and she's not getting a dime from him. And in fact, she said they have to go back to court. So she's homeless. She has 5 children. And her only income is housewives. And she created that, right? Jen created this, but I do believe that she's getting herself back in a scenario where she's having to ignore red flags, just different red flags. She stayed in a relationship with her ex, Will, who she said they couldn't even have a conversation. And yet they were married for like 20 years or together for like 20 years or something like that. Jen has to look at her role in this. And at some point, if she continues to align herself with people that it doesn't suit her for financial stability, she's always going to continue to be in trouble. And I like Jen. I think she's great. I like Katie. I think, again, nobody's perfect. They certainly have their stuff, but they just seem like genuinely kind people. I just think that Jen has to think about what she wants and how to get that. Okay, so let me move on to Tamra and Shannon. So Tamra reported starting therapy to see where her anger stems from. And Shannon replied, in my therapy, which I love that. She was like, in my therapy, I'm creating boundaries by not being in toxic relationships. And then Shannon tells Tamra that they were never close after she returned to Housewives, and she has no desire in moving forward with a friendship. And so Tamra initially tries to claim that she's trying to see where her anger stems from. And then as soon as Shannon says she's done with her, Tamra then immediately lashes out and says that Shannon called her intoxicated numerous times during her 30-day rehabilitation stay, which Shannon denies. Andy adeptly points out that Tamra believes Shannon's an alcoholic and Shannon simply doesn't hold this belief. And he asks, at what point are you going to let this go? And the answer is never. I think the answer is never, because it's not about care and concern for Shannon. It's what these women are doing is they're just trying to defame each other so that they don't look as bad in comparison. And I think the message is just like, be a good human and then you won't have to do that. I don't know. But then I guess we wouldn't have housewives, right? Like someone asked me on my Ask Me Anything on Instagram, like what franchise would I be on? And I was like, I am too emotionally healthy to be a housewife. It just like, it would not, no one, I'd be a snooze fest. Although I can get mad and verbally eviscerate people. I guess if I acted outside of my character, I could be good at it. But I just wouldn't do that because that's not who I am. So let me make one comment about Tamra's claims about Shannon calling her intoxicated from a 30-day facility. I worked in an intensive inpatient rehabilitation facility for general population folks, and then there were professional folks, police officers, lawyers, nurses, so people who hold a professional license and are working to get that back after losing it due to like addiction. I'm very well acquainted with inpatient rehab. I did that for years. No legitimate facility in the universe would allow any sort of drinking or drug use on campus. Now, that being said, all programs are not created equal. And sick humans, which people, when they come into rehab, they're sick. They're sick people who are addicted, right? So they'll do anything to get whatever they need to do, including, for example, drinking mouthwash. And so a lot of places, they have to ban things like that. My point is that all facilities have the same goal, but they go about that goal in different ways. There's different levels of security. There's different levels of observation. There's different levels of safety and accountability holding, and there's different levels of professionals who work there. So is it possible that Shannon somehow snuck something? Sure, it's possible. Is it likely without someone noticing? No, because if someone had done that, so in my experience, if someone sneaks something in or on family day, a family member, someone does something, right? It will get found out because it's like, if you think the game of telephone on Housewives is wild, you should hear the game of telephone in a rehabilitation center. It is like a group chat that is on 10 all the time. There's no secrets because there are people there who want to get well and who are working really hard. And, they hold that it's all about holding people accountable. And so it's unlikely that Shannon would have continued in this program, been allowed to continue. And, because if you break the rules, you can be asked to leave. But there are also circumstances where, a program may say, you're sick and let's see how you respond to this. And if someone says, you know what, I'm sick, I fucked up, and I'm ready to take accountability, sometimes people either are allowed to stay or they get transferred to another facility. But either way, addicts are sick is my point. And I think putting that out there is just another way to try to defame Shannon. So Tamra goes on to explain that this is the 10th reunion we are talking about Shannon's drinking, and production does flash back to receipts proof timeline. That is true. And Tamra wasn't the only person who had ever brought this up. Shannon's drinking has for sure been a focus for 10 years. Sincerely. And Shannon says, and I quoted her, "I don't use alcohol to cope," and then goes on to say, "I would drink because I didn't feel good inside and it would make me forget." That is the definition of using it to cope. She also reported that when she started, she couldn't stop. And she believes that she can control her alcohol use and therefore isn't an alcoholic. So as Andy pointed out, Tamra believes she's an alcoholic, Shannon doesn't, and they're just in this perpetual war of words. And the problem with a black and white view about the label of alcoholic or addict is addiction doesn't follow the same playbook for everyone due to the nuanced factors of unique epigenetics and more. So it is possible to have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol and to not identify as an alcoholic and to stop drinking to improve one's life. So Gina, for example, Gina is someone who doesn't consider herself an alcoholic. She doesn't work a program. She's not in the 12 steps. She doesn't drink, but she actively works on herself in therapy and works on recovery in a sense of just being a better human. Some folks never had a rock bottom, or I don't believe I'm an alcoholic, but I just know that I had this unhealthy relationship with alcohol, right? Making it black and white, to me, only perpetuates denial and fuels resistance in people who are struggling, oh, well, I'm not that bad. So I do see a lot of Shannon for sure, has exhibited an unhealthy relationship with alcohol over a period of time that people have expressed over and over and over again. She has admitted that even though she thinks she doesn't use it to cope, drinking to forget because we don't feel good inside is literally the definition of drinking to cope. Shannon does have denial and minimization. And saying she can't stop when she starts it is not being able to control it, right? So my point, though, is that acceptance and change are slow, nonlinear processes, and people require grace along the way. It's not like you have a DUI and then you're like, oh, I'm an alcoholic, and then you get better and that's it. It's like people get a DUI and then they're like, no, I don't think this is a problem. And then they're like, wait, is it? Well, maybe. And then, no, like that meme of that girl who tries kombucha and, it's at first she hates it and then she loves it and then she's like, wait. That's what recovery is like. It's a really challenging time. And sometimes it takes people years to come to terms with and understand their character defects or their, relationship with alcohol or drugs. And sometimes people are not ready to change. And all we can do is what I call it planting seeds. Planting seeds is to treat someone with care and compassion, to express concern, to understand that they see things differently, but to plant seeds anyway and hope that eventually they sprout. And you know what? I've seen it happen. In a recovery space, it's not about being right by labeling. It's about helping someone sift through the muck of saving their own lives in ways that are sustainable for them. Sometimes it's harm reduction, which it sounds like It sounds like the method that Shannon is using is what I would call harm reduction. So the harm reduction model says that if you have an unhealthy relationship with alcohol or a substance, but you're not feeling like this is an issue and you're not interested in stopping, how do we reduce that harm? So that means that if you're drinking, you get a driver, or if you're drinking, you don't go out. If you are using a substance, you are utilizing it in ways that are not going to be life-threatening or harmful. In the recovery community, there are a lot of folks who will tell you that this is not an accurate perspective, but I assure you it is. Being a therapist tells me that there's not one right way for all people. Is abstinence preferable? If eventually may Shannon get to a point where she realizes she needs to abstain? Yeah, she might. And she also might not. Some people need more pain before they're ready to say, you know what, this is really a problem. And if you think a DUI is enough, I can promise you for some people it isn't. I had someone come in who was using intravenous drugs through a PICC line and got an infection, almost died, and was not enough to stop. And so I guess my point is that addiction is a terrible disease. Nobody grows up and says, I want to be an addict. And I think that a lot of compassion is deserved. And I also think a lot of accountability needs to be had too, right? Two things can be true. You guys know how I feel. It's not about but, it's about and. I have a lot of compassion for Shannon, and she needs to continue to work on herself. She needs to continue to look at her relationship with alcohol. And because at the end of the day, any of us can use any sort of unhealthy mechanism to cope, right? People use overeating, substances, gambling. And there's a continuum where it's not so much about how often you're using something, in my opinion. It's about why are you using this? So the frequency of it or the severity of it, yes, that's important. But the real question for me is, why am I doing this? Why am I turning to alcohol because I don't feel good about myself? And how do I work on that in a way that is real and that is healing instead of poisoning myself and making it worse? And it's hard, right? It's hard. I just have immense compassion for people who are listening to this, who are resonating with this, who understand, who have been through the process. So I just send everybody listening to this who this resonates with so much love, so much support. And I can't even imagine what episode or reunion part 2 and 3 are going to bring us. But I'm going to be honest. Yeah, I'm really thrown after this episode. I'm thrown. So this is going to be it for me today. I will be doing some episodes of Bite Size Bish this week, so you can look forward to that. And I have a really exciting announcement, which is that I am going to cover Anatomy of Lies. And so for those of you who don't know what Anatomy of Lies is, it is a documentary on Peacock about writer Elizabeth Finch, who wrote for Grey's Anatomy, who not only did she fake cancer for decades, she was a pathological liar and just lied about 1 million things. And so I obviously got activated, AKA triggered. And I have so much passion about it that I am going to be doing maybe certainly 1, if not 2 episodes on it. It may be the season finale, I'm not sure, or the season finale might be my episode with Mandy Slutsker, which will be sometime at the end of the month, I think, or beginning of December. Either way, listen, my point is, I don't know what I'm doing yet, but I will keep you all posted, and I'm very open to feedback. So if you have any other suggestions, let me know. Thank you all for just being you. I am grateful for you all. And so for today, I'm going to say take care of each other and yourselves, and ta-ta for now. Disclaimer. Posts are not intended to diagnose, treat, or provide medical advice. Your Bish Therapist is for entertainment and informational purposes only. The podcast, my opinions, and posts are my own and not associated with past or present employers, any organizations, Bravo TV, Greyheart Productions, or any other television network. The information in YBT podcast and on its social media is provided for general informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose or treat. Please do not act or refrain from acting based on anything you read, see, or hear on YBT podcast or associated social media. Communicating with YBT via email and or social media does not form a therapeutic alliance. Melissa, operator of YBT, is unable to provide any therapeutic advice, treatment, or feedback.